So there seems to be a very definite pattern between motivation and a certain element or a certain timestamp in a weightlifter's career. This tends to be as the weightlifter is going from a novice weightlifter through to an intermediate, or possibly as they are a year or two into their intermediate phase of training. And I've seen it occurring very, very frequently in athletes as they are going from their early to mid 20s into their late 20s, all the way through to their late 30s. So I'm very lucky in my particular area of work that I get to work with a lot of weightlifters, both competitive and kind of amateur or novice weightlifters. And I get to work with a lot of weightlifters who are at different points in their career. I work with people both in terms of their physical coaching, their actual programming, what their lifts look like, but also in terms of their psychology. And today what we're going to focus on is a quite unique piece of motivational psychology, and it's a very, very predictable loss in motivation that we tend to see in amateur level weightlifters as they are leaving from a novice perspective and going into more of a kind of intermediate level lifter. So weightlifting in the initial phases tends to be very motivating. As a sport, as a grouping of movements, the snatch and clean and jerk allow us to control an awful lot of variables. They allow us to work on very specific aspects, and they allow us to see quantitative and qualitative improvements as we go from session 1 to session 5, session 5 to session 10, and year 1 to year 2. So in the beginning phases of the sport, once we get over the initial barriers to entry, and these barriers to entry tend to be a lack of mobility or else a massive surplus of mobility, so not being able to hit the positions initially or else maintain the positions. Once we pass over that initial barrier for entry, once an athlete can hit the position, they often find weightlifting as a sport to be incredibly motivating. And there's a couple of reasons for this. So the first reason is that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in weightlifting. So if you have a quite low snatch, you'll probably still be able to go into the gym on day one and put a barbell overhead in one smooth movement, whether that's with a 20 kilo barbell or a 40 kilo barbell. Then with some quite small minor changes, you will see a large increase in your proficiency with the lift. So both qualitative, how the lift looks, how the overall flow of the movement goes, but also in the qualitative elements, the speed, the power, the absolute weight on the bar, the amount of repetitions you can complete before failure drastically increases when we just have quite small technical changes. For this reason, there is a glut of motivational aspects in the beginning phases of weightlifting. So then we look at the more kind of quantitative elements of somebody learning weightlifting. There's also a massive glut of motivation there. So it's very, very easy for us to see progress and see us progressing down that road towards being a more effective weightlifter or a more competitive weightlifter. So usually when we get somebody starting off with the snatch and clean and jerk, they have had some experience with the barbell. They might have squatted, deadlifted, pressed or rowed before. They might have played some sport where they did some power cleans, or else they might have just tried out some of the movements in the gym. That means when they initially come in to start weightlifting, they have a quite large ceiling in terms of their strength capacity, in terms of their power capacity. This makes it very easy for us then to progress, because when we're training, we're really just learning the movement. And this can often last for years when we're weightlifting initially. You will probably have a squat that is plenty strong for all the snatch and clean and jerk you want to do. Even if it's not plenty strong, you probably have to put very, very little capital into improving your strength numbers for the initial months or possibly years of training. So even for youth athletes, they will very rarely be kind of peaked out on their strength work until they have developed a certain proficiency with the lifts. What we're oftentimes seeing in this phase of training is just the athlete becoming more specific. So they've come in with a very general level of strength training, very general level of power and speed work, and now that is becoming more specific. So they are basically molding their potential and pushing it into that specific funnel of weightlifting, and specifically for the snatch and clean and jerk. As I said, This phase of training can often last for many months or possibly even a few years. So it's very clear. The pathway towards success is very clear. And because of that, we tend to have a lot of that kind of goal achievement theory where we are continuously setting out goals, short, medium, and long-term goals. We're continuously hitting them. In the initial phases of training, you probably don't even realize there are goals set out there, but you are going from an empty barbell to having green plates on the bar, to having yellow plates on the bar, to having blue plates on the bar. You might be now suddenly going from training with a technique bar to training with a normal weightlifting bar. All of these things are incremental goals that are being set. You're achieving them, and it's incredibly motivating as we start training. But the problems tend to come a couple, or if not more, years into training as a weightlifter. So what are these problems? Why do they occur? And why does weightlifting seem to have this issue more than almost any other sport? So to start off with, weightlifting is a very physically demanding sport. It's very physically demanding on a few specific areas, and it tends to be quite monotonous in its training. So if you are a soccer player, you will do sprinting, jumping, you'll do agility work, you'll do some gym work, you'll do some direct ball work, you'll do some team work, you'll do some tactical work, and it's a very broad area of training to improve as a soccer player. If you're a weightlifter, you are either getting stronger, becoming more powerful, or becoming faster, and then you are just honing the technique on your snatch and clean and jerk. So it's very, very specific. Pretty much everything you'll do will be in the same area, and pretty much everything you'll do will tax the same kind of joints or tax the same body parts that you're using every single time you train. I spoke earlier about the initial physiological adaptations required for weightlifting being quite minor. Now, the unfortunate thing is that when we get to the point where we have reached our potential with our current strength numbers or reached our potential with our current power numbers, the amount of energy required for physiological adaptation in those areas is quite significant. So you might have trained for the first 3 years of weightlifting. Your squat might have slowly increased just as a kind of factor of lifting weights regularly. Your pull will probably have slowly increased, and your press might slowly have increased. But when you get to the point of those relative silos becoming full at the same time, you will have to put quite an amount of energy into either increasing the squat or the pull or a combination of those. The unfortunate thing is you're now not able to do the same amount of specific weightlifting work. You might even have to take a number of months out as a prep phase to do some high capacity training to then go into your strength training. And it means you have a lot of time away from this relatively specific type of training. This has a whole host of issues such as lack of specific practice, lack of technical proficiency. You might have been technically changing aspects of your lift and you're not going to be able to do that as quickly now. Or you might just have simple things like you do a high capacity phase of training, you actually become slower for a number of months as you might have gained some body weight or you might have lost some body weight. You might have other morphological changes that come along with that. And now you're suddenly learning to lift with a slightly different meat vehicle than you were previously. The second thing then is that the amount of effort needed to add each kilo as your lifts get heavier is non-linear. So the amount of effort I have to do to go from 70 kilos in the snatch to 80 kilos is not the same as what I would have to go from 120 kilos to 130 kilos. It's unfortunate that just trying harder and just putting in a small bit more work will not be sufficient to make you a better weightlifter after a certain point. That's just the absolute nature of sports performance, whether it's gaining muscle, whether it's gaining strength, whether it's gaining power, whether it's gaining technical proficiency and motor cognitive elements. It is not always going to be linear. In fact, it will very rarely be linear. Most of the time it will get exponentially harder to get better as you become more experienced. And this, combined with the unfortunate objective nature of weightlifting, is where we run into the roadblock. So a lot of us love the sport of weightlifting and powerlifting or strength sports in general because they're incredibly objective. I can go in on week 1 and understand my max weight is 100 kilos in the bench press. I can go in on week 8 and I might have added 10 or 15 kilos to that. That's great when we're looking to take more control, when we're looking to see progress in our life, when we're looking to have an aspect of our life where we are actively pursuing something and it's constantly getting better. The more we work, the better it becomes. This is a terrible aspect, though, when you're used to gleaning motivation from these quantitative elements. So if you're used to being motivated by the 2 kilo PRs or the 5 kilo PRs or the 10 kilo PRs, that is a whole problem in itself, due to the fact that those elements are extremely objective and that they won't always be repeatable month on month, year on year, cycle on cycle. The final issue I think we should outline as well is that the old adage of youth and talent is no match for experience and treachery, or whatever version of that you want to quote. Unfortunately, that is not true in the sport of weightlifting. Certainly there are applications for that in other sports. Unfortunately, weightlifting is not an old man's game. So we do have athletes now who are continuing their careers into their 30s, even into their mid to late 30s, which is great to see. It's great to see sport in general is moving in that direction. But the unfortunate thing is that as you get a small bit further down that line, it becomes more difficult to make progress. And then if you're somebody who maintains their motivation by seeing progress, you can reach roadblocks very, very quickly, and it becomes problematic or difficult to maintain consistent motivation over the course of a training block. So what should you do if you're in this position? So we always talk about process orientated versus outcome orientated. We talk about people needing to enjoy what they're doing. And that's all well and good, and I think we should give it the lip service it deserves. You should say people should be focusing on the process and enjoying the process, but we need to dive into that a small bit more. So most of us go to the gym or compete in a sport or do a certain activity because we enjoy what we do on a weekly or a daily basis. We enjoy the act of going to the gym, doing the snatch, doing the clean and jerk, lifting weights, going for a run, whatever it is. You enjoy that actual aspect of doing that and doing the training. The PR number then at the end of the day is the last thing we should be looking at. It is a valuable metric. It's something we should look at just to kind of audit our own training. But if we're being realistic, we do the sport because we enjoy training. We enjoy going through a strength cycle, going through a competition peak and performing. But that's why we do it. We're not doing it because we're paid to do it. We're not doing it because we really need that extra kilo on the barbell. You enjoy the process. You enjoy what you see every time you go to the gym and the weights get a bit better, you become more proficient. But we really shouldn't be looking at the absolute number at the end of the day. There are issues with absolute numbers. There's issues with PR numbers. There's issues with us comparing ourselves to other people or us comparing ourselves to previous versions of ourselves. Even us comparing ourselves to people we've never met who are on the internet or putting up videos. So your genetic capacity is not the same as everyone else. In fact, your genetic capacity is pretty much the same as nobody else unless you have a twin sister or a twin brother. Even their capacity for lifting absolute weights is slightly different because it's very likely they'll have some sort of different stimulus as you would have grown up. I think it's a real kind of point of growth or a sign of growth when an athlete starts slowly moving from this really outcome orientated, really objective measurement of success versus failure, when their mindset starts morphing from purely a quantitative, numbers driven outcome to a process orientated or a growth orientated mindset. So am I improving across all aspects of the sport? Am I becoming more diligent in my recovery processes, in my learning, in my documenting of training? Am I becoming a better athlete in terms of how I can help other people, in terms of how I feel after training, how I motivate myself prior to training? I think all of these things are really valuable for people to learn as a warning to people. Even if you're in the initial phases of training, you should be looking for a better, in inverted commas, measurement of success than just the numbers on the barbell. Numbers on the barbell are great. We all pay a lot of attention to them. A lot of us are very obsessed with them, but it shouldn't be your only source of motivation and training.
Up. There you go. There you go. Come on, big boy. Up, there you go. Come on.